what's a chief program officer? At MarkLogic, my duties really include looking forward to our major program areas. And those major program areas, data-centric, of course, really focus around implementing our data strategy and merging that and aligning it with DOD's data strategy. Let me just dive right in. So a lot of people are very familiar with the DOD data strategy. It's been out for, probably 18 months now. I think many in industry have embraced this document. It's a extremely well laid out document. I think it's an extremely well visioned document. I embrace it whenever I'm looking at DOD data needs, and I really like to focus on the back half of the document, because while the front half of the document is important, gives us a great vision, gets us the guiding principles, quite frankly, the essential capabilities are where most of industry is going to focus in delivering the capabilities that DOD is asking for. The goals and the objectives have to be adhered to, and adhering to those in our implementations and in our strategies, and as we aid DOD in launching things like AI and ML and analytics, and whether it's going to be analytics with regard to mission data or analytics with regard to human resource data. All of these have to be adhered to from this document. So great vision, excellent principles. Certainly up front, they talk about the strategic asset. I mean, there is no greater asset in DOD than to know where your equipment is, how you're performing, where that strategic asset can be moved to aid in a response. The DOD's transportation system is foundational with data. You can't move one asset from one location to another location without having the awareness of all the data that backs up that strategic asset, whether it's a plane, whether it's a tank, whether it's a mission support unit. That data must be migrated with that information. So, those are some of the things that I think of when I look at the guiding principles. Certainly there's ethics, certainly there's collection of data, there's going to be the need to migrate towards artificial intelligence. But let's dig into the essential capabilities. So when I look at the document as a whole, and I look at the essential capabilities, these four foundational pieces really stand out as to why industry needs to embrace this document, and not just the upfront part of the document, but in this more meaningful document of essential capabilities, the goals and objectives. These pieces of the document are how to implement. And when industry is called on by DOD to implement, we need to have this document in mind when we're implementing. So looking at the architecture, key factors here are certainly going to be cloud enablement. Cloud enablement, and if we're watching all the different capabilities that are coming out in cloud, we're watching the openness of multi-cloud, meaning are you going to be able to put your data spanning across more than one cloud? Is there going to be a cloud where your execution of an application is being rendered that's accessing data on yet another cloud? An open architecture with cloud enablement that is agnostic across any of these elements is going to be needed. It may not be needed tomorrow, But in an implementation where we know the DoD is driving towards incremental advancement towards multi-cloud, then that's going to drive an open architecture. That's going to be a driver for how data is presented. The architecture is also going to be impacted, quite frankly, by how it's divided. We know that the open architecture principles are going to be clearly pushed to the edge. While the mission is conceived at the command level, it's executed sometimes by the soldier. And if you're not thinking of that data architecture being driven from the command and control in a secure, safe, containerized location down to a war zone to the soldier where the seconds matter, that's going to have to be where these essential capabilities and an open architecture is emphasized. So then we talk about standards. I mean, CMMC, everybody's talking about standards all the time. It's important. They're included across the board in every DOD RFP that's released. We're adhering to the standards in all methods of delivering capabilities to the DoD. But when it comes to data assets, what you're really looking at from a standards perspective is, are you ensuring the critical? Are you meeting the DoD systems for sharing what can be shared, by who it can be shared with? The essential pieces there are not always so cut and dry. You know, are there elements of security that have to be brought in for standards that say, okay, this is a Five Eyes capable system, so the data here is shareable across our Five Eyes partners? Or is this a system that has component level security that cannot be shared? Those proven assets, the successful methods to share data in a DoD environment, that one ensures security, two ensures capabilities are being met, three ensures that the information that must be shared is shared by those that must see it, is important. And that's an alignment piece that your system is going to have to follow. Your system is going to have to take into account the necessities of sharing data that can be shared, that data cannot, if there's data that is needed to be protected that cannot be shared, then that data needs to adhere to that standard. So then delving into governance, policies, process, principles, frameworks. Governance is some of the most extensive pieces that are attended to within any large system across DoD. You have to meet the standards. You have to meet and exceed how those policies are adapted. Many of the metrics are taken, these quality metrics that are needed to make sure that the soldier is supported in the field within seconds. If that's the standard that needs to be met, then the governance and the policies have to support that standard. We also need to look at systems that have oversight capabilities, systems that, when we look at the data networking capabilities, the data sharing capabilities, systems that have tools to reach new heights with capabilities, that are, formulating AI anticipatory intelligence. This governance is going to lean on those principles very, very much, because we need to have the ethics built in. We need to ensure that the governance is as secure as access is. Are the policies being adhered to? Are the frameworks and tools being utilized in the way that they were intended? So when you look at the governance, and when you look at the further out possibilities here of not just localized systems, but enterprise systems, you're going to want to keep those governance pieces in mind. And in data, governance is also often access or movement, or sometimes how it's utilized. One of the pieces that I think is very critical here is talent and culture. Industry must align with the talent and culture of our DOD partners. And the way we do that is we make sure that we're doing the same things and adhering in the same way that DOD is. And we're going to see this likely in the way that acquisition is made. It's a transformation of the workforce. And contractors and industry is aligned with that transformation. Many times industry is called on to support mission, to support capabilities that support the mission, or even when you're in a back office environment and you're handling the HR data, you have to adhere to the talent and cultural norms that are being adhered to at the talent and cultural norms of our government sponsor. So when DOD puts down policies and they in effect enforce the processes that must be followed, then we're going to follow that with the data. And the data, especially in HR, has to be protected. Not everybody across the spectrum, when it comes to, say, HR data, is privy to all the PII that's out there. Quite frankly, everybody's Social Security number needs to be protected no matter where they're at. But more importantly, are we protecting the information of an individual on location, on deployment, on information that's just shared because we want to make sure friends and loved ones are notified, things like that. So when we look at the data centricity and the culmination of data coming into a centralized location, that data formulating its way through different aspects of the essential capabilities, and it's not just architecture, it's not just standardization, it's not just being policy driven or process driven, it's also a people driven environment. Okay, moving on. With that, the next part of the document, which I think, again, we look at the different aspects of the document, how to tie ourselves to the importance of what came out of this document, and how to apply this document in our response and in our building of a system and in our delivery of capabilities and in our partnering with DOD to get to an environment that meets their expectations through a strategy document. I think when you look at their goals and objectives, we really find that this is a business-centered environment. Making data visible and ensuring that users are able to do their job is just a business principle. I don't care whether you're business oriented is finance data, or if you're oriented with HR data, or if you're an intel analyst on a mission critical analytic environment, that's your job. And making that data accessible in a way that all the discoverable data you need to do your job is met, it's just a simple business decision. And these kind of business decisions and these efforts that I think went into this document bring forward a capability that if you apply that in the DoD's business environment across all spectrums, whether it's logistics, whether it's fire teams, whether it's mobilization of a unit, all of these are important. And, you know, it may be in a program like ABMS where we're really looking at the battle management from an entire spectrum. You know, you're bringing in the satellite feeds, you're bringing in the ground information, you're bringing in command and control aspects. All of this needs to culminate around what data of particular interest, of value, is presented in a way that most particularly in, you know, a targeting capability or maybe a unit movement capability is centered and goal driven. Finally, let's go into making data accessible. When DoD brings their data into a system, it's no different than DoD bringing a communication systems in to access that data. So when you're looking at the purpose and the needs and the targeting of around those uses, making data accessible is very critical. I look at it often as, you know, what are the pieces of data that need to be driven to a certain need? Not all data needs to be oriented for all users. Some users are multispectral. They're going to get different data than users that are just looking at map locations. Other users are going to be focused on movement of particular targets. So data accessibility can be refined and can be opened up using your architecture so that the mission is met, but doesn't have to be opened up for everybody. And that's where it comes to kind of an understanding. So when you make data understandable, you're really saying, okay, what data is needed to make an imperative decision based on the context and based on a quality driver. So when you go into 4.3 and the objectives there are really is the decision-making power based on all the decision-making data that's there. So making those timely decisions, bringing that information more centric, meeting those imperatives, very, very much the alignment that DoD is wanting to see. And we're seeing more of that in a lot of their needs as they're coming out. So industry is definitely focused on these first three as a way of data presentation. Then you start getting into how to take that data and make it operational, making data linked. A lot of linked data analysis tools are out there, a lot of ensuring data that says this data file is connected to that data file through these people files, or I've got information on a person from a health records perspective, and I've got information on this person from an HR records information. And that person also has information available based on, you know, their current assignment and location. So when you link all that data together, you get a full 360-degree picture that gives and ensures that you know everything you can about either a person, or if it's the mission, or if it's really driven by some of the more critical aspects of a particular mission, where there's dependencies driven around, perhaps an AI ML standard. Maybe there is a relationship that needs to be brought in so that you can do some object-based elementals, like if I have a particular tank or if I have a particular aircraft, what is the information I know about that aircraft, so I know the distance, the capabilities, the known airports that aircraft lands in, the known unit that tank may be connected to. Is that the information that I want to ensure is relational to the information that says, well, if that tank's moving, this unit's moving, which means this capability has X distance to go. And that's where you gain confidence and trustworthiness in your data. So is your knowledge base correct? Did you get those fundamentals correct? And are you developing that across the enterprise to ensure that, whether it's HR data, whether it's mission data, whether it's, back office data for contacts and library information, all of that trustworthiness and confidence in your data. When was that data last reviewed for its lineage, and how old is that data? Is it cataloged in a way that's contained and insured for information in many of these that's needed across a greater enterprise? So that's where I align systems on the trustworthiness of the data. Do you have a capability to ensure confidence? Have you created an environment where the data that goes in can be removed as it went out? Making your data trustworthy says at any point that data was manipulated, do I know how it was manipulated? Do I know by who it was manipulated? So these kind of trust factors are certainly something that DOD has built into this document to ensure that they're getting a reliability factor as well as an understanding factor of what's happening in their enterprise. And also, we're going to talk about some, interoperability issues. Not everything works with everything else. Quite frankly, this is where I think there's some serious challenges with data centricity. MarkLogic recently collaborated with one of our DoD customers where we brought aged data systems that were very, very critical. However, they were aged. And not only was the data aged, but the systems they were on were aged. And we had to migrate all of that data from disparate systems across an enterprise into a cloud, bring all that information together, ensure that it was interoperable, ensure that it worked with a new endpoint environment while maintaining its mission critical capability. When you look at the different aspects of interoperability, you're looking at where did it start? Did it start on an aged mainframe computer system that's no longer serviceable? Did that data just consist of rows and columns, or was there anything about that data that was challenging? Was it scan data? Was it, something that we have no heritage on for that data? Is it your start point is the transition, or do you get to bring the start point from its original capability? So you look at the interoperability of the front end of the data, and then what is the interoperability for its potential further end state? Because if you're migrating one system in a data centric environment, that data centricity may be bringing in other data. It may be bringing in a capability that has not yet been thought of but you can bet that if it's vehicle data, just say maintenance records, what about the maintenance record library of information to fix that information? So we may have a system that is centralized on maintenance records, but then we also have a library of maintenance documentation, how-tos, all of the records that go with the history of maintenance. So all that needs to come together in a data centristic environment. So finally, in the goals and objectives, we're looking at reducing risk, adherence to standards, and the really, making data secure. There's always a need to share. There's always a need to inform, but there has to be a need to secure. One of the things that we saw with Snowden was we had a need to administer, but the administrators don't have to have the need to access, right? So an administrator that can provide the users that need to have access does not necessarily need to have access himself. So when you look at an administrative goal, it may be that the administrative goal is to be able to do the administrative job without having the need to administer access to that data. I think this is very, very important. If administration doesn't require access to particular data, but they can provide access to those that need that access, that's meeting an objective all on its own to ensure that the lower level job of getting access is not permitting the higher level access of the data. And what we are often seeing is systems and systems operators and administrators that really can do their everyday job in high-performing ways without ever having to see or access the data. So this is, I think, another place where industry can really culminate and come around to share what needs to be shared, but also give access by those who need to get access. Okay, so I'm going to move on from, and that's really, the things that I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the goals and objectives of the data strategy. And I do want to get a little bit in. I don't know how much time we have right now because I'm a little off on the clock, but on the ethical principles. So this document it came to me out of the recent JAIC, a recent JAIC award that we got, and that ethical principles document just resonates. And there are pieces in documents when you get that award and you say, okay, now I've got to move forward with doing a job for DOD, and I look at how I'm going to implement this job. When I saw this as ethical principles for artificial intelligence, a lot of this clicks. Being responsible, using sound judgment, taking care with what those endpoint AI capabilities are going to be, even based on just readying data, is an imperative. The ethical principles piece of making sure that data is doing its job while AI capabilities are certainly going to take those actions. It starts with the data. So being responsible in these ethical principles is just such a sound foundational piece. Building equitability within your environment, ensuring that you're not biased, ensuring that the AI is not going to have a bias because of the data conditions that you deliver. Taking these steps is going to be, again, a place where industry is going to have a responsibility to ensure that the AI is built on an unbiased environment. And the AI unbiased environment is driven by the data and how it's presented, the code that lays over top, these foundational pieces. Again, traceability. So at MarkLogic, we have something called provenance and lineage of our data. So when data comes in, we time, date, stamp that data. We have an understanding of what is brought in. As that data goes through its maturations and processes and needs and applications are driven against that data, things about that data that are changed, updates that are made, uses that are tracked, all of that is tracked in provenance and lineage. And that's very important so that we understand what did the data go through to reasonably tell me what traceability I have to understand what changed, what was processed, how was it processed. And this is very important. Very good alignment to something like this gives that trust, makes you a responsible contractor, makes your capability implemented in a way that is meeting these principles. Finally, reliability. Look, if we're not building in reliability, bad things happen to good people. I can't say enough about how when we look at the possibilities around AI, where aircraft are flying with just simple instructions, with the ability to set a UAV from one point to an endpoint with the possibility of that endpoint being destruction, that AI has to have reliability built into it. You have to ensure the safety. And then we have to have security built around all of this. We talked a lot about security previously. Securing elements of the data is very important, while sharing elements of the data is also very important. So there has to be an effective trade-off, and there are going to be those. Lastly, being governed, right? We're going to, quite frankly, always look at the consequences, look at the potential for having to say, look, here's how you disengage, here's how you deactivate. Governability is going to have to anticipate challenges, governing against capabilities that potentially end. With the ability to say, okay, I've got to deactivate this capability and build in a trigger mechanism that may erase that data. So being responsible there, bringing those artificial intelligence pieces, forbearing against actual capabilities is something that, I hope to look forward to doing in the coming years with DOD, because these principles are drivers that help us as industry align and deliver capabilities that are more advanced than we anticipated. Chris, before I go on, how much time do we have? Should we take questions?
Pretty close to time, but if you're able to let folks know where they might be able to contact you and your team in case they're interested in learning more, I think that would be great, since I'm sure our audience probably has a lot more questions here.
Okay, sorry for talk through the question period. So I have a couple of slides on my company that'll be distributed for everyone. This slide deck has my email on it. Please reach out to me in email. MarkLogic is a Silicon Valley corporation, and I am in the DC area, and I'm sure many of the folks that are watching are familiar with me. Hopefully, what you've gotten out of this is that, MarkLogic is certainly taking strides towards integrating and aligning ourselves with these documents. It's not only adhering to the FAR, it's not only adhering to CMMC, it's not only adhering to all those instructions and all those programmatic controls, but it's also adhering to just, basic capabilities that come out from our government customers that we need to align to. With that, Chris, thank you so much. FCW, thank you. I hope you guys learned something today, and I look forward to talking to you all soon.